Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, and during our show over the last 23 years, I've been interviewing writers about their craft, what they've done in the past, what they're doing now, what they might have planned for the future. We also have had other brands of artists on, musicians, actors, sculptors, and it's a pretty wide net. And we continue to have a pretty wide net. If you have ideas for people who might be good for the Writer's Block, either writers or poets or other forms of artists, please look at our address at the end of the show and send those names in. We'd be glad to consider suggestions for new guests on the program. I also want to mention, as I did, that we're in our 23rd year. We're very proud of that record here on Cape Ann TV, but this is only one of the many shows produced by Cape Anners for Cape Anners here in the studio. You can't get that kind of community spirit or effort by subscribing to Dish. So I want to remind you that cable is the source of this really fine community artistic effort. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a writer. His name is George Rosen, and he's just come out with a wonderful book of short stories titled The Immanence of God in the Tropics. George Rosen is, I'm going to read now from a bit of the blurb on the PR information for this collection of short stories. George Rosen was born in faraway Chicago, came east and was educated at Harvard. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, which served as the setting for his 1990 novel, Black Money. He has also worked as a political speechwriter, a high school debate coach, a low-income housing consultant, and a semi-professional actor. I have to ask him what semi means, and how many movies he's been in. His short stories have appeared, among other places, in Harper's, the Yale Review, the Harvard Review, and a Harcourt Brace anthology of crime fiction, A Matter of Crime. He has reported on West Africa for The Atlantic and on Mexico for the Boston Globe, and writes frequently for the Globe's op-ed page. He has been a radio commentator for Boston NPR, WBUR, and taught writing at Tufts University. His awards include the Frank O'Connor Memorial Award, 2 fellowships from the Artists Foundation, and most recently a fellowship in fiction from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. Impressive resume, George Rosen. Welcome to the Writer's Block.
Well, it's a lot of years squeezed into a few sentences. So
will you add the Writer's Block appearance here?
Of course, yeah. I was on 20 years ago.
It was quite a while ago. You were a semi-professional actor. I didn't know that about you.
The semi-professional actor I define as not being a member of Actors Equity, having been paid on a handful of occasions for acting, and that's it. That's it. I've been paid, but I'm not a union member.
But not Actors Equity.
Not at all, no.
I'm going to hold up, as I mentioned before the show.
Also, some of the people who pay me were relatives, so I don't.
You don't have to add that.
It is, yeah.
No. If you're, I have a friend who wins swimming competitions. She's the only one in her age group.
Good.
But you needn't mention that. Yeah. This is the book. Got a zoom on that from Kate. The Immanence of God in the Tropics. You tell us something about the importance of that second word.
The second
and
word.
its meaning, the immanence.
The immanence. Immanence is actually a sort of, particularly the immanence of God, is kind of a technical term in theology for the indwelling presence of God in the natural world, sort of as opposed to transcendence. God looking down and being outside of the universe is transcendence, and immanence is inside. And it's generally thought of as an idea as equivalent to the Holy Spirit in Catholicism, or there's a concept called the Shekinah in Judaism, which is, again, the presence in the actual world.
Did you want the echo? Using this word, which is a fairly rare word.
Well, this story...
Did you want the echo of immanence in there, the temporal...
Something about to happen.
Temporal.
Something about to happen. Not really. The main character in that story is a seasick missionary in the mid-19th century who's going out to Africa on a sailing ship, and the first kind of expedition of missionaries from England who were highly educated people, kind of Oxford, Cambridge types, and who had been encouraged in a famous speech by Dr. Livingston to go out and fight the slave trade and convert the heathen and all these kind of things. And so he has theological ideas very much in his mind when he's going out and doing this. That expedition was an incredible disaster, which is another story which someday I might write. Nearly everybody died. They ended up, rather than fighting the slave trade, they ended up kind of being hoodwinked into fighting on behalf of some slave traders without being aware what they were doing. It was an absolute unmitigated, horrible, Flashman-esque disaster, if you have any knowledge about Donald
I should
Fraser's-
mention here that the name of the book, the title of the book is The Imminence of God in the Tropics. That is also the title of the closing
story.
short
Right,
to
yes,
which you
that's
just
what I was talking
just
about,
referred
that very last
with
story,
Reverend
right, yeah.
Seavey
Yes.
is kind of disabused of his more traditional
Yes,
religious
he
idea.
kind of, and he starts out gung-ho, and he ends up kind of ascending into the world of the Godhead, but of being of absolutely no use to the other missionaries by the end of it.
His progress made me think of both the imminence and the imminence, because he does change.
He does change, yeah.
The book of short stories alternates between three locations: Kenya, where you worked, New England, and in one case Mexico.
Yeah.
And you go from, say, Kenya in the 70s to New England in the 90s, and Kenya in the 70s, New England in the 80s, and back and forth. The titles of the stories are Our Big Game, The Sauna After Ted's Funeral, Mobley's Troubles, On the Flats, A Good White Hunter, A Second Language, and then the final title story, The Imminence of God in the Tropics. Can you tell us something about the structure of the book itself?
I wanted to hop around to a certain extent. I mean, this is not rigidly sequential. I don't think these are a bunch of stories of a number of stories that I've written over the years, over actually a very long period of time. The first one was written in about 1975, which was Mobley's Troubles in there, and the last one actually appeared in a magazine, the Harvard Review, in 2009. Yeah, and all of them, what links them together in my mind are kind of that they're travelers' tales, basically, as a story structure, as a kind of story. They're either told in the first person by someone who's out by himself in a fairly exotic location, and it can be geographically exotic, or in some of the cases of the New England ones, they're people who kind of feel very isolated and are seeing the home around them as a distant land, and kind of have either witnessed something which is sort of remarkable and maybe a little outrageous, or participate in something which is like that. And some of them are told by the person who it happened to, and some are told in a third-person voice. But I wanted that sense of, in the simplest sense, kind of fish out of water stories. I wanted these are people who are kind of wandering away from where they are into new places where they're able to look at the world and their surroundings completely fresh. I mean, where they kind of don't know what's going on because it's a different culture, a different location, and that kind of alienation is that's a kind of depressing word, and this sense can be both depressing and actually very exhilarating, of kind of where everywhere you turn there's something remarkable, which is what occurs to one of the characters in a second language, the story, where just it's a little bit dazzling and a little bit distracting and a little bit strange, a little bit dangerous, and that kind of experience of travel, of kind of going out of yourself, going out of your place to other lands. And in this case, some of them are, really genuine, distant places with and distant times in the case of the last story, and some of them are kind of more internal journeys and travels.
Most of the stories, it seems to me, could be oriented or have begun at least in parts of your own experience. But the last story could not have been, because it's set in the 1850s, I believe. Can you tell us about that decision to have one purely obviously fictionalized story, because it's way in your past. And with stories that are contemporary?
Right. Well, I think in some ways that last story is, I feel it's kind of the essential story in the group, in the sense that it deals with some of those things I was talking about, and kind of strips away, this is something I've, a place I grew up with, or a place I visited. None of the stories actually are in the actual content of the story are things that occurred to me, but with the exception of that one, they all start from a place I've been, in the sense of there's a young American teaching at a school in East Africa who kind of observes this titanic battle between an old colonial teacher and a young African headmaster.
You lead with the teaching story.
Yes, story, and that's where a kind of post-colonial battle is fought out on a soccer field between these two teams of kids. The last story, I'm not totally sure where it came from. I know the source of it is in this tale of the university's mission to Central Africa, which I was talking about before, which is a historical fact.
At the request
it was a disaster. At the request of Dr. Livingston.
The story starts out with Reverend Seavey on a ship, and they're going around Africa to land in East Africa.
Right, they're going to go to East Africa.
He described then what happens after Johanna?
Oh, they
after they land.
Yeah, they come. They come.
Of the story.
Yeah, well, the first thing we see of the guy is he's seasick, wearing a large hat and playing flute on the deck of this sailing vessel, and thinking about kind of the nature of God. And part he's thinking about the nature of God because there's a small group of African Christians who when they get down to the Cape of Good Hope, at the very bottom, they pick up a small crew of people, of Africans who've been already converted to Christianity and are going to help them out. And they're asking kinds of questions like, what color is God's skin? What does God look like, and these sort of things. And these are things which he hasn't necessarily thought of before. And he starts thinking seriously and also slightly in a kind of addle-brained way about these issues, and talking about them with his fellows. They land to refuel and get provisions at an island off the coast of East Africa, which is controlled by a Muslim prince who's, I don't know how to describe him. He's certainly not a serious follower of his faith, but he's interested in philosophy and women and
eats pork
fruit,
and
he kind of plays a little with the earnest young missionary, and also the CV, this missionary, kind of encounters a lot of this is countering the natural world. I mean, just, if you grow up in England and it's raining all the time and it's gray and tedious, and it's just like, I don't know exactly when this will be broadcast, but today is, a perfect British day, and all of a sudden he goes to this spectacular place where everything grows, and there are lush trees and fruits everywhere, and there are beautiful streams and waterfalls and dazzling sunlight and everything, and he kind of tries to figure out the world and what he's going to do with it from this. And when he gets to the end, he's quite certain that he doesn't want to go out and convert anybody. In fact, he makes a big point of that he doesn't want to convert anybody, but he doesn't want to cause trouble either. And,
So he goes along with them as sort of
he kind of says he'll be a helper.
But he, in fact, is kind of an apostate after that revelation.
But the quality of the revelation is the person who wrote the description in the back. I think it's ended up now in the back as a sort of bumping into. I mean, this guy really does meet God, and it's not at all what he expected, or it doesn't leave him feeling how he expected. But he's doing okay with it.
So you've got the nice physical parallel of the British countryside, which you just mentioned in the story, and the tropics, which is in the title. And certainly there's a unbelievable chasm between those two climates. And it seems to be reflected in his attitude.
And so that to me is a kind of essential travel experience. I mean, whether he's actually confronting God or this has anything to do with theology, who knows? I mean, I'll let the reader try and figure out exactly what's going on there. But what is undeniable is this is somebody who travels a very great distance geographically, and it has huge consequences for the way he sees the world, because he's completely open to the experience of traveling. I mean,
Was that your sensation when you went from Massachusetts to Kenya?
In part, I've always loved traveling. As a kid, that was traveling around the United States a lot. With my father was a businessman and a kind of political activist who both things, and we had friends and relatives in all sorts of different places, and I was usually a good deal happier when I was somewhere else. As you get older, that becomes a kind of very ominous kind of way to look at the world, to say I'm always happier when I'm not here.
Geographical cure.
But I have always found that there's just something immensely liberating about going to some place where you're a little bit lost and where everything is surprising, and you have to try and figure out how the world is put together. And Africa did that for me, but I've also traveled in a lot of other places and had that same kind of experience. I also like the sense of trying to negotiate your way in a strange culture, in a different language. That to me is a very exciting kind of experience, or a way. It's a way to experience.
And I think
the
that
world.
comes across well in the book. That sensation of surprise and opening. I want to switch gears, if I may, just a little bit, to talk about this form. You obviously like and are very comfortable and are very good at the short story form. We're talking about 15, 20, 30 pages. I think if you get past 50, you start talking about maybe novellas. But these are clearly short stories. And most people would say that the short story had its heyday back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. when you decided to write short stories, is that inevitable because that form is so comfortable to you, or is it that you want to bring short stories back into the mainstream? Is there any kind of motivation like that?
I like stories. I like that kind of length. And I like the sense of something that could be told at one sitting, or in one chunk, in one experience. I've also liked, having written for newspapers and writing political speeches and things like that. These are all forms where, it's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you get it all in one experience. You don't have to come back the next day. That to me, I find exciting. It's true that there used to be there were a lot more short stories in the 30s, 40s, and 50s because there were a lot more magazines that people read, which would publish short stories, so people could read the Saturday Evening Post or whatever and look at these things. I think actually, I'm not to be overly Pollyannish about a literary form, and who cares? I think there is an increased interest recently in short stories because there are some new technological forms in which it makes a sense. The sad way to look at it, or the kind of depressing way to look at it, is that the attention span of people has shrunk drastically, and
nanoseconds. I think.
Yeah, or at least a half-hour situation comedy or something, just a short thing. But there are, in fact, there are now one of the stories in this. In fact, I'm not sure yet which one, but I just found out earlier this week is going to be on a app called Storyville, the Storyville app, which you subscribe to for, I don't know what it's, $5 for either a month or 6 months, something like that, and you get a story a week which you can download to your iPad or iPhone. I unfortunately have neither an iPad nor an iPhone, so I will not be able to experience this story in its super Jobsian way. But
so if you think of an idea that seems appropriate for a short story. You're not reticent to write it as a short story because of the market decline, and think, well, maybe I could distill it into a longer op-ed, or maybe it could be a novel. Short novel.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always, in a sense, you figure, who's going to read a short story anyway? But what the heck, there are some people out there who do read them, and ideas, I think, have natural forms. Sometimes there are ideas which are short story-like ideas. There are ideas which are novel ideas, and then ideas which are movie ideas, and all the way down the line.
I got the 5 minutes schedule signal from Kate. I want to ask where viewers can get The Imminence of God in the Tropics.
Well, you can get it at your local independent bookstore. They're on order actually around here at Gloucester. Yes, so the bookstore will be getting some. I'm going to do a reading on the. Actually, may have already occurred. I will have done a reading on the 28th of November at the Gloucester Writers Center, and I hope to do some other ones around there. There already is an Amazon page and a Barnes & Noble page, and about 20 different pages where you can
I'm going to hold the book up again once more.
Get it.
I got the 3-minute signal from Kate, so I'm going to begin to close out. George Rosen, thank you for being on the Writer's Block and sharing with us some of the ideas behind and in The Imminence of God in the Tropics. I hope all our viewers will go out and buy it.
Okay.
I want to thank you, viewers, as well, for being with us this evening on the Writer's Block. If you've learned something about the short story and meeting God in the tropics from George Rosen, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks again, and I hope to see you again next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.